I'm Nancy Silverton. I'm the founder of Brea Bakery and co-owner of Osteria and Pizzeria Mozza in Los Angeles and Orange County and Singapore. And I'm here to answer questions from the Serious Eats community. And from Lance Roberts, Nancy, your pizza crust is unique to say the least. I'm wondering where the inspiration came from. Did you know where you were going for with the dough from the start, or did you discover what you liked through the process of coming up with the recipe? I'd also love to know what your favorite pizza places are from LA and around the country, world, and if you took any inspiration from them. So the inspiration for my pizza crust is twofold. One from a pizzeria in Arizona and the other from a bakery in Rome. The first time I ever had Pizzeria Bianco's pizza in Phoenix, Arizona, I was hooked. I mean, to me, it was the best pizza I had ever had. And I sort of filed it away in my memory that one day, I too will make pizza like that. The second most influential pizza I had was actually from a bakery in Rome in the Piazza Campo de' Fiori, and it is the bakery where Jim Lahey from Sullivan Street Bakery in New York worked for several months. There they do a flat pizza very similar to what Jim does in New York. This one is topped with nothing. It's their Pizzeria Bianco, but it's a very similar crust to the crust that Pizzeria Bianco does at Pizzeria Bianco. And basically what it is, it's puffy and it is tender, crispy, very different than the thin cracker crust pizza or the wetter style pizzas from Naples. What I loved about the crust was that I had appreciation through the eyes of a bread maker. That crust, that open structure, was very similar to the breads that I make, but just stretched much thinner. So I rented a restaurant, pizzeria attached, and now I had my chance to put my bread making skills to the test and develop what I wanted to develop as far as a pizza. You know, I have to say, in all honesty, it wasn't that difficult to come up with a recipe, because I really based the pizza crust on one of the breads that I had been doing at Brea Bakery that had sort of a similar flavor and similar characteristics. And so with just minor tweaking, I took this bread recipe and sort of converted it to a pizza crust recipe. And you know, we're talking about the same ingredients, right? Flour and water, leavening. From Wet Dog 2. What are your feelings about the no knead bread making method? Are there qualitative differences that should steer us away from it? You know, to be perfectly honest, I've never made a no knead to knead loaf of bread before, but I have definitely had several successes from novice bread bakers, and I've had terrific bread. For me, when I think of any food product, the most important test is the result, right? And how you got there is sort of incidental. You know, I have my ways of getting there, and the no knead bread gets so many similar results in a different method. Basically, what Jim Lahey, who came up with this method of making bread, and he's a fantastic baker, and I love all of his breads. He tested the idea of combining flour and water and leavening, right, what would go in a basic loaf of bread, and just stirring it and letting it sit for a long time so that it would develop the characteristics that are similar to a loaf of bread that is kneaded for a bit to develop the gluten that would lead to the structure that was in the final loaf of bread. And he did it. I mean, his bread is terrific, and I see no differences in the loaves that he makes and loaves that follow a more traditional method of developing the gluten by kneading. Epizaz asks, in the Mozza cookbook, you offer a pizza dough recipe that has been altered and suited for home ovens. How does this recipe differ from the Brea Bakery dough recipe? The recipe in the Mozza cookbook for the pizza dough and the recipe that we actually use at the pizzeria are very similar. The pizza dough recipe at the pizzeria is a dough that is fermented much longer than the dough that is in the book. And I did that just so the home baker could sort of be a little bit more spontaneous when they came to this decision of making pizza or not. They didn't have to plan 2 days ahead of time. So if you want to make a dough that is a little bit more similar to the one that we use at the pizzeria, just plan ahead for 2 days. Keep your sponge longer and your dough longer, and keep it a little bit longer after it's shaped into the dough balls. But what I did do with the recipe in the book is I added a touch of wheat germ to give it a little bit more complexity in the flavor, a little bit more sweetness that wheat germ adds to kind of compensate for a shorter fermentation time. But other than that, it's all the same. I don't make my pizza dough with a sourdough starter. I make it with a sponge using compressed baker's yeast. I have a touch of rye flour in there, barley malt, white flour, water and salt. Dash of Ginger asks, how did the transition from baker to multi-restaurant entrepreneur impact your creative process? That's a very interesting question because it is true. When you make the choice to branch out, own more than one bakery or more than one restaurant, you can't be everywhere at the same time, and therefore you are not in the kitchen as much as you once were when you were just starting out. And that goes for myself, and it goes for every other restaurateur around the country. So how do we deal with that loss of, or that daily satisfaction of creativity? Because that's really why we all got into this business, is because we love to create, we love to cook. For me, I just love the challenge and the process of creating. I get that satisfaction by sort of living vicariously through the people that I hopefully inspire. And so I vicariously live through their success.